Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the Laubenheimer readings. There are two of them, and they're basically addressing both slips and mistakes and how to prevent them in design. My name is Tyler Yang, and here we go. As discussed in the Laubenheimer readings, basically there's two different types of user errors. One is a slip, and I found it easier to understand as some kind of accidental mistake. So that's something like mixing up your mom and your elementary school teacher, or like putting salt instead of sugar in your coffee. You act somewhat unexpectedly by like uh, mixing up an action with another, and that's what a slip is. It generally happens on autopilot. And what a mistake is more of a fundamental misunderstanding that causes errors, even if you were consciously doing what you intended to do. Um, so not understanding that like putting a towel in a filled bathtub will never dry it out, or trying to cut food with a dull spoon. Um, these are fundamental misunderstandings of the tool being used, and that causes the error. So generally, it's easy to assume that a slip is more on the user's end, but I think that it's a certain responsibility of the designer also to make sure that the slips are minimized just so that the entire experience can be just better. So there are four different major ways to address slips, and that's first to engineer helpful constraints, offer suggestions, generate good defaults, and have forgiving formatting such that slips are minimized. So restraints can definitely be a double-edged sword. I'm often using like applications and things and just frustrated by the fact that I'm limited in my ability to do things. So restraints can be irritating, like in the case of like a set of handcuffs. But in other circumstances, having restraints can just be helpful. Like for example, handrails on on a staircase, right? That's a restraint preventing you from falling off the side. Um, Unless you really wanted to jump over the banister. And it's not limiting your ability to climb the stairs. It's just preventing you from climbing it the wrong way and seriously harming yourself. And I think that's what important aspect of restraint should be considered in preventing slips, because you can literally slip down the stairs, but like say for an app, you want these restraints to catch slips basically. Another way to prevent slips is offering suggestions. And when this example was discussed in the reading, I immediately thought of search engines. Basically, as you write things up, the search engine will basically assume what you're going to write next, and it helps you cut down on spelling mistakes, or maybe searching something that isn't as powerful, and it'll bring you to your conclusion faster. So if a suggestion engine is well engineered, it's able to prevent slips by simply, well, not having you input the action, rather pick an action generated by the machine, which should in theory work. So similar to suggestions, using good defaults is also in the realm of solving slips by simply uh, moving some of the control out of the user's hands, such that they're able to choose something that we know will work in that interface. So good defaults kind of remind me of like a hiking trail, right? If you are going down a very beaten trail, that probably means that a lot of people have done it before, and it's likely safe and it'll likely work. And that's kind of the way that a lot of programs are made. There's a main usage, and if you suggest that main usage so that the user doesn't have to make as many mistakes, then that's perfect. So I think that forgiving formatting is also a very important go-to, and mostly has to do with data input, in my opinion. Um, and that's basically just changing the format so that it's harder to make slips. So for example, the social security number exists in nine, I believe, numbers. So you chunk them into the 3, 2, and 4 pattern. Date of birth, you have the month, day, year, setup. if you kind of chunk it together so that you can check each part rather than having it like a flat, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, kind of setup, it's easier to parse and pick out any slips that you've made. So just having that formatting in a very digestible manner is important in design, I think. So in this section, I'm going to be outlining avoiding mistakes rather than slips, and these are a lot more fundamental errors in programming, and for that reason, I think it's much more vital to address. And as you can tell, there's many more solutions. So I will outline gathering data, design conventions, affordances, previewing results, removing memory burdens, confirming before destructive actions, supporting undo, and warning before errors are made. So at the top of the list is gathering user data. I think that that's kind of strategic in that if you understand your user, most of your mistake basis will be removed. And as the kind of chart shows, it's a lot of like government inquiries into Google data because it's very important to understand your clientele, which to the government is all of the United States citizens. If you are able to generate information about your client, you're able to make it oriented towards the client, and you'll understand what precisely they're using it for, and things like this, and that will fundamentally change how many mistakes are being made. So I think that following design convention is a very interesting point that Laubenheimer brings up, and she quotes Jacob's law, where she says that users spend most of their time on other websites. And that kind of reminds me of a lot of like mobile phone dating apps, where basically, for example, like Tinder, it's like a very simple design scheme, and it's designed so that you're able to just swipe left and right and look at the pretty pictures and things like that. Um, and it's effective. It's disgustingly effective. And that's why so many other apps utilize that same scheme. Yeah, so that's design convention. So this is another major point that is the host of a lot of mistakes, right? If the affordances of a interface isn't very visible, isn't very transparent and doesn't convey the proper information, that's where I feel like many mistakes stem. We've discussed affordances a lot already, but things like this coffee mug, there's a certain way to hold it so that you don't burn your hand, and it's very easily communicated because I can fit my fingers into this. Um, had it been oddly shaped, maybe the affordances wouldn't be so apparent, and that's bad design. So, previewing results is another thing that Laubenheimer mentions, and I am reminded immediately of Word. So there's in Microsoft Word, there is a preview function, and it's very powerful in that I don't want to waste a lot of paper. It takes time to print. Ink is not cheap. So for bigger actions, it's important to show the results and catch those mistakes if they're there. So I think that previewing results is a very powerful method to reducing mistakes. So this is an interesting point that I feel like a lot of interfaces don't include, but Laubenheimer mentions removing memory burdens, and that specifically to me kind of translates to reminders. Basically, your short-term memory is limited, so list as many of the givens that the user put in, and remind them. And I'm kind of reminded by like climbing. If you don't have your checkpoints, if you don't have your footholds, it's very easy to lose your position and end up all the way back at the start. These kinds of things are major issues when you're, say, looking for airplane, like a plane ticket, and you suddenly forget what date was I looking for again, what time, where am I going? Like, I don't know. I'm a little absent-minded sometimes, and it's very helpful in the design scheme of the website just to show uh, what you previously input to really cut down on that memory burden. Confirming before destructive actions is also a very important thing to include on any program, I think. Most UIs have it. especially when it's like a creative kind of UI, because you can waste a lot of time simply misclicking and irreversibly ruining like the amount of work or in the specific example where Safari is included, like you don't want to lose your tabs and things like that. And it's not really difficult to include like a small dialog box that simply says like, are you sure you want to do this? This is a very big change that you're going to make. This inclusion, I think, is important in every single context. In a very similar vein to confirming before destructive actions, I think it's also important to include something that counteracts destructive actions. Maybe you can't counteract you irreversibly deleting a file, but you can counteract maybe like pressing Control A and highlighting the entire screen and accidentally replacing it with a space because you misclicked something. It would be incredibly frustrating to have to rewrite like an entire document based off that. But we have a lovely little Control Z button in most in most programs, and I think that's a very helpful design. Also very similar to warning before destructive actions, warning before errors are made. And how Laubenheimer really differentiates these two categories is that there are certain types of errors that are cumulative. She cites Twitter, character limits. What comes to mind for me is like maybe you're formatting something incorrectly. A bad design would let you format everything incorrectly to be until the very end, and then when you submit it, it says like, oh, by the way, you have to fix all 30 of these. Good design would be warning upon the first formatting error, such that you're able to correct it and then correct it further down the line. So yeah, that's all of the points in addressing slips and mistakes that Laubenheimer covers. And I'll end this with three major questions. So when was the last time that you slipped on an interface? When was the last time you made a mistake on interface? Do you end up blaming yourself for these slips and mistakes, or do you think it's more of a design flaw? Personally, I end up making a lot of mistakes, and I'm almost always very frustrated with the design. But sometimes I'd like to, play devil's advocate and say like, well, the developer wouldn't have been able to consider what kind of person I am. And examining this under more critical lens, yeah, maybe the designer should have understood me better. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.